What's up, guys? Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the commission lawsuit settlement that was handed down, agreed upon between NAR and the plaintiffs last week. If you're watching this on replay or down the road, hopefully you'll be able to check my suggestions and stats and see where it goes. But we're gonna get into it. If you don't know me, I'm Jeremy Kane with eXp Realty. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is my YouTube channel, my social media, Why Invest Wednesday, and living in the Denver suburbs. So if you're watching on something other than YouTube, head on over to YouTube and check it out. But let's really dive in to this commission settlement and talk about it. So first things first, we must talk about what it is, where it came from. To some of you as consumers, this is absolutely some new news that maybe you heard about it, maybe not. There was a couple of lawsuits, like 40, I think, that kind of started coming down the pike. Late last year, the judge decided that they were able to pursue these as class action lawsuits. The Sitzer-Burnett trial was kind of the big one, the first one. And in that court case, the judge found the real estate industry, several brokerages, and the National Association of Realtors guilty of, issues surrounding commissions and who pays them and the transparency around them. So today, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But essentially, the lawsuit was about the fact that it was required in some MLSs and required by the National Association of Realtors at some point to have at least something offered as buyer agent compensation to be paid by the seller. It could be $1, it could be 10%, it could be 2%, whatever it was. The commissions have always been 100% negotiable. However, they're citing that it wasn't negotiable if you had to put a value in there that could not be zero. And so that's where this all kind of went from. That's kind of old news. The new news is that NAR, the National Association of Realtors, has recently come to a settlement with the plaintiffs talking about this. So the settlement, let's kind of dive into what that looks like. And forgive me, I'm going to just make sure I hit all these points. But first and foremost, it was a release of liability of certain parties, the National Association of Realtors, MLSs that were associated with the National Association of Realtors, and, companies across the country that did less than $2 billion in real estate volume. Is kind of the general consensus of the release of liability. It also removed liability for lawsuits moving forward and all of that. As well, the compensation offer was moved off of the MLS in this settlement. And so that is, something that's a little bit different. Typically, there is a line that says, compensation, co-op, broker fee, whatever that is. It could be flat fee, it could be percentage. And when this kind of all started, the MLSs went to making it not required. However, now they're suggesting that we move it all the way off of the MLS. And then written agreements will now be required for participants who are acting for buyers, so agents that are acting for buyers, as well as $418 million settlement payment from NAR to be paid over the next 4 years. So those were kind of the key points as handed down in an email to all of us realtors from the president of NAR last Friday. And so first and foremost, I want to talk about this is a proposed settlement. It has not been accepted by the DOJ. However, headlines kind of grabbed onto that. Agents across the country have talked about it. And so I'm getting some questions from you guys, the consumers, home buyers and sellers. Some being like, Jeremy, are you going to get a new job? And, all of those things. And, I first and foremost want to say that all of our commissions have always been 100% negotiable. And we're going to continue to provide the same amount of value, earn those commissions that are paid out to us as we move forward. So that's that as we go. We will play within the rules. If this is, agreed upon by the DOJ and this becomes precedent, then we'll take it. We'll make sure we're within the rules. We'll continue to provide that great service and value to all of my clients and all of you and the industry at large. So that's the first and foremost. But these headlines kind of took off, right? First headline, 6% commission on buying or selling a home is gone after Realtors Association agrees to seismic settlement. So first and foremost, 6% was always gone, right? It was always 100% negotiable. I think what this headline fails to capture is really the confusion on who pays it. The DOJ made some statements back in February on a previous case that was settled, and they said that, the buyer should be able to, negotiate what their agent gets paid and compensated. And so with that, they're kind of, there's a lot of things that they mentioned that they said, hey, we want to make it illegal for sellers to pay buyers agents and so on. So there's been all of that kind of weird confusion, who pays. One of the things in the settlement in the small print is that buyers agents can no longer work for free, which is fair. There's an assumption that hey, work with me, it's free, you get all this, I'm going to represent you. That's kind of where we had this problem in the first place. Certainly it's not free. Certainly someone's paying it. Technically the buyer's money comes to the table, goes to the seller pays the listing brokerage, and listing brokerage pays the buyer's agent, is typically how it worked out. But that could all change, and that's okay. And so the amount, who pays it, how it's paid, how it's negotiated, all of that is kind of where this kind of lies and where we're at. So that's kind of the first and foremost thing that is important to realize and understand. But to say that the 6% commission is dead is, first of all, it's probably a violation, as the 6% commission never was alive, because commissions have always been 100% negotiable. But secondly, nowhere in this settlement, in this lawsuit, does it say how much we can charge as buyers representatives, how much the seller can pay the buyer's agent or their own agent, the listing agent. And so that's kind of the confusion. The next headline I want to kind of break down is, could a major lawsuit against realtors mean lower home prices? Well, the agent commissions have technically been baked into the home prices already. And, certainly sellers could opt to not pay a buyer's agent, as they could have 2 years ago, today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. But regardless, all of the homes, how we've been doing it, have agent commission built in, right? And this talks about how you can offer concessions now as a seller in this proposed settlement. Well, those proposed concessions, we'll talk about this in a second for buyers, but those are still on the contract and still not, still separated out on an appraisal. So that could be some issues there on the appraisal. But a decrease in home prices. If I'm a seller and I'm saying my house was worth $600,000 last week, and now I don't have to pay the commission, I don't think that a seller is going to be like, oh, now that I don't have to pay a commission, I'm going to take 3% off of the purchase price to get the same net, right? So if you see this, I think people will be focused on that exactly, and getting more for their side, and negotiation is going to be alive and well, which it should be, and that's how the law is written. So as we kind of break this down, if home prices are going to plummet, I don't know how having a buyer's agent removed from the process is going to cause the buyers to come in and be like, I'm going to offer $50,000 less on this $1 million property just because. Right? The seller still has to accept the offer. I don't think that the lack of inventory that's out there is going to say, okay, well, since we don't have to pay the buyer's agent, that person doesn't really matter anymore. We're just going to take less on the property. No. And we'll talk a little bit about what a seller's agent or a buyer's agent does for the seller here shortly. But this is all kind of the confusion and what's going on. I just don't buy the fact that home prices will plummet because we're moving this commission from the seller's responsibility to the buyer's responsibility, maybe back to the seller, depending on how it's negotiated. So that's the next thing that I don't think is going to happen. Prices will still be determined by basic supply and demand, in my opinion. Real estate agent commission rules are about to change, shifting costs between buyers and sellers. So this is inferring that sellers are now not going to have to pay the buyer's agent commission, which they never had to. It was always an option. But what this is saying is that the buyers are now going to have to pay it. Well, the first-time home buyer with down payment assistance is going to have a hard time coming up with the cash to pay their representation in order to properly help them into their first home. Understand the 150 things that a real estate agent does: negotiating the offer, getting under contract, getting into properties, looking at properties before we make an offer to make sure, there's not something glaring that could impact what we do with inspections, what we do with objections, how we negotiate at inspection. What if the appraisal comes in at a different price? All of these things. What if we have loan issues? Is my earnest money protected? All of those things are certainly going to still be needed. And so the buyer could be responsible for it if the market shifts in that way, and the commission is now fully responsible of the ability of the buyer. But nowhere in this settlement does it say that the seller cannot pay a buyer's agent commission. It just says that it cannot be offered on the MLS and advertised on the MLS. So as we kind of unpack this, we can step back and understand, okay, well, certainly there could be some changes that, from the quote unquote norm that we're used to, where, as a buyer's agent, you would pull a property and see what the commission is. Technically, we were never allowed to not show properties based on the offering, because our fiduciary duty is to the buyer, getting them into a home that works for them. So nowhere in there does it say unless we get paid. And so technically, or not technically, in reality, we should be showing any home that was on the MLS that, or we could get access to for our buyers, because we're looking out for their best interest, getting them into a home regardless of the compensation offer. And so to say that the buyer will have to pay it is not what is represented in this piece. There's been a ton of misinformation out there that, the buyers, first-time home buyers, are completely screwed and so on. I think there will be a little bit of a push to back off of those, but the honest truth is that it is still possible within this wording of this settlement for either side to compensate the buyer's agent an agreed upon commission amount that is negotiable. And so that's where we really have to step back as buyers and sellers. I've said a bunch of things in real estate jargon and say, okay, what's the impact? Okay, for sellers, certainly if, it's a hot real estate market, seller's market, everything's going well, you may have the opportunity to sell your house to an unrepresented party or a buyer's agent who's done their work on the front end, and the buyer's going to pay if you're not offering commission co-op. That's certainly a possibility. But when the market shrinks down, how are we going to make sure it's marketed to the most amount of people and get you the most in front of the most eyes, get the most people through, and get as many offers as we can to help increase that price or escalate that price, or even get one offer, right? Because we're so used to our current market where it's 5, 10, 15 offers if it's priced correctly, marketed correctly, and so on. A lot of that goes away, and a lot of that helped the seller move that value across the board, right? Because if you have more offers and there's 5, 10 offers on the table, certainly competition comes in, the price is driven up. That's, demand for one home, and it is what it is. So, it's really important as a seller to think about what this looks like. And you certainly can offer 0. We can talk about all the different marketing options when we have the rules and we know what's going on to market and advertise appropriately. But that's super important to consider as a seller. And as a listing agent, hopefully your listing agent has a plan. You can market the property within the rules based on what you decide, right? If you want to offer compensation, well, it's not going to be offered on the MLS, but it could be offered in other places per this settlement. We'll see if the DOJ leaves that in or they pull that out too. However, it could require conversation. The thing that's interesting here is it's going to be a conversation or, an email exchange between the agents or whatever, our associations and our commissions require that, to me, seems a little bit less transparent in nature than having it on the MLS, having it public, understanding it's on the settlement statements and so on. So we'll see how they work around that. And again, the proposed settlement is a proposed settlement. So we'll see what comes of that. The next piece is for the buyers. What's this mean? Well, certainly you could run into your dream home that's not offering compensation to the buyer's agent. And then the question becomes, do you go straight to the listing agent? Well, certainly you could, but you're not going to have any representation. And the risk of losing your earnest money, getting into some sort of legal battle, will increase. There are more for sale by owners in litigation than real estate agent represented transactions. So it's almost like, do you want to pay the attorney fees now, or do you want to pay for your agent and find that cash to do that? All of these things will come into play and could potentially be a question on the buyer's list. Okay, well, now the buyer's agent, as the DOJ wanted, can negotiate their commission if the seller's not willing to pay of that home. Okay, what's that look like? Do you need more concessions so they can cover closing costs so that you can pay your agent? Or do you go in straight to the source and say, this is what we're doing? Now, for agents out there, certainly you're going to pay the world's best surgeon to do, a heart surgery, or you're going to pay a new surgeon, and there's going to be price differences there. So that's where you have to, have the conversation, negotiate with the real estate professional, and see what it's worth, right? Do you really have the time and the energy to do all of the things that happen to have a smooth transaction if that's what you desire based on your situation? And that's completely up to you. And there will be buyers that try it, and I'm sure there will be, great situations that go smoothly, and I'm sure there will be situations that go bumpily. Bumpily, it's not a word, but that's where we're at. And so for buyers, for sellers, the honest truth is, let's wait and see what happens. However, these conversations will be had. And as a buyer, it's, it might be a little bit scary. However, you talk to your agent, see what you can do. Hey, I'm in this situation. This is how much cash I have. I've been saving for years to get into this home. Well, okay. Well, we're going to work to get X amount of dollars from a seller of a home that can provide that commission, for your buyer's agent, so you have representation and don't get into something as an amateur that could be a problem. So have the conversations, understand what's going on, understand that when your agents don't, when your agents are talking about this, it's not because they're trying to charge you or rip you off. In fact, it's them being more transparent and helping you understand how the compensation works. No one works for free. I got kids to feed. And it becomes a balance of, okay, is it worth my time to help this person out? How valuable is my time to do this if I can only get compensated X? And that's why it's fully negotiable. And so that's where I think these conversations will lead. I think that this settlement is a win across the board. I think more transparency is good. And I think that, the fact that sellers would still be able, under this settlement proposal, to pay a buyer's agent commission is absolutely key for you as a consumer, because there is still that option. There is still hope that there will be some compensation offered by the seller. Might not be exactly what you and the buyer's agent agree to. So you might have to come with a difference, or the seller concessions, or there'll be lots of options once the dust settles. But I just want everybody to know that my job as a realtor will continue to go on. I will still continue to represent all of you at, the very highest level. And the truth is that I have some kids to feed too. And I've been in the business a long time. I have a lot of success. I'm a great negotiator, and I will provide that service to you based on our conversations and the compensation that comes down from it. So I hope this eases your confusion a little bit, that the real estate industry is going to crumble and go away tomorrow, and buyers are going to be completely on their own and so on. Just not the case. And we'll talk a lot about, on this channel as we move forward, about what we can do as buyer's agents, and the value that we provide, and so on. So I think there will be a little bit of shift, but you don't get to talk to you don't even get to email an attorney without fees coming through. So I think it might be a little bit more like that in the future in real estate, and that's okay, because our time is valuable. the professionals that are out there will absolutely get you across the finish line, get you to the table, and hopefully get you into those homes so you can start building wealth, so you can continue to do that. As you guys know, all of my clients are able to receive an annual review with me where we really manage the asset, and my responsibility and my relationship with you goes much further than that closing table. So I hope to continue that. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Just want to put this out there because I was getting a ton of questions. So hope you have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.